Welcome to the Lost Signals Discusses Literature,
where we apply the revolutionary Mott skill
to classic and contemporary works of prose.
So, join us once again, won't you?
Hello, and welcome back to the Lost Signals Discusses Literature. Today, we're going to be discussing, for the first time, a comic book, which...
GNs, baby.
I am very excited for, a medium that I really love, and I wanted to get to be part of these discussions. So, we're talking about Persepolis, book by Marjane Satrapi, and I'm gonna kick us off with our funny log line.
Who are you?
Well, hold on.
Okay.
All right, I guess we'll do introductions first. My apologies. I am your host, Steve Hermosi, joined today by Chris Morgan.
We're the kids in America.
Fucking Ian Manzer. I almost called you Ian Morgan.
Whatever.
And Scott Thurlow.
Punk's not dead.
All right, so Persepolis, The Story of a Childhood. It's the first book of Persepolis, of which there are two. So if you like what we have to say about this one, check out the second one as well. Funny log line for today is going to be Persepolis, Beyond the Veil.
Mm-hmm. It'll become more clear as we speak.
So let's get started with discussion about the plot. Ian, why don't you kick us off?
This is a very unique graphic novel in that it's a memoir as a graphic novel about Marjane, who is a young girl who grows up in Iran during the reign of the Shah.
I believe it's to start in like 1978 or 9 or so.
It starts in 77.
Okay.
And it discusses the oppression of the Shah and how her kind of bougie family deals with that and the conflicts within the Iranian society. And then basically the Islamic Revolution happens and turns her life around, and it discusses her growth. I think she's
12-ish.
Yeah,
around
that.
Between, I think this whole story happens between like the ages of 7 at one point, but mostly 10 to like 15.
Yeah, it's growing up in both with the Shah and her family are more or less revolutionaries, or her extended family, revolutionaries, her immediate family, kind of plays ball, and then it ends with her parents sending her off when the opportunity arises during the reign of the Islamic Republic there. So I think I know actually quite a bit about Iranian history. It's very interesting to see this point of view. Obviously, because it deals so much with classism and with politics, it's interesting to see this point of view of kind of a middle-class environment versus necessarily the poorer class in Iran. But yeah, like I think it's an important work, and it tells it's a very interesting story and a very horrific story. It deals with the Iran-Iraq War. And it gives you a real sense of what the Iranian people had to deal with over the course of the past several decades. And I absolutely adored it. I thought I going in blind, I think I still would have gotten a good sense of the history. And knowing the history, I feel like I've gotten a good sense of what it's like to be there. And I have to give it probably the strongest of 3s because I think it's a great story. And even though it's the first half of the story, it still comes to a proper conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, I believe Volume 1 and Volume 2 were standalone, as I recall. Or like either way, you don't have to read one or the other. But I do agree. So, as you said, you're probably the most familiar, the most historian bent about like the region, and it's the knowledge of what happened. But so via that, I know a bit about it myself, but pretty much through you and varied bits. But I will have to agree that coming in mostly blind, unfamiliar with it. I knew of it, but not much else. I think it's paced pretty damn well. Like it's a perfect slice of, like you said, Sivo, her early childhood, adolescence into like mid-teenhood or so, and all the things that were happening to her and her family and the country itself in those like the span of like the 5-6 years. So yeah, I think it kept itself going quite nicely throughout. I was always interested. And it's also like the pacing thing, it's very small, like consumable chapters, if you will. Right, so there's always like a little headline like the letter or whatever. Persepolis itself is a topic, like the revolution and then this and that, right? So get little slices, not even vignettes per se, because it's all linked together. It's all chronological. But because of that, I think it's easy to follow along with. It does dole out its information, its historical, like, pertinent facts and so forth. I don't even say exposition because it didn't feel exposition to me, but all this to say, I think I agree that it's I'm going to give it a 3. It's a very strong plot, and it carries itself, and it's very engaging throughout.
What was fascinating to me was growing up at the time when the hostages were taken in 78, being in fourth grade, and then seeing the whole thing where the Shah goes to Egypt and then eventually comes to America, and not really understanding what it was, but to my eyes, like the Shah was the victim of what happened. I mean, it's just the narrative that I absorbed as a child. And then reading this, I mean, and growing up and, having my own perspective on what's been going on, I learned more about Iranian history and about the times like I lived through this book more than anything else. It really filled in a lot of gaps. It really gave me some really fantastic perspective. Again, as somebody who was day to day hearing about the American citizens that were held hostage in the embassy, and like hearing all the stories that were coming through here, like, oh, they could see all the bombs on the wall and so forth. And then hearing Marjane talk about like all the rumors that were circulating in the same country, all the second and third and interpretations and perspectives, and all the hearsay she thought of, and all the mythos that was created by her kids and that her peers, and that she passed along. I have to give it a really strong 3. I mean, because it filled in a lot of gaps, but it did so, as you guys said, the pacing was incredible. The amount of information you were given in such a great package, the way it was delivered. I highly recommend. Yes.
Yeah, I have to agree with you guys. I first read this book when I was in school, and it really stuck with me in this great graphic novel class that I had. And it is one of the reasons that I went back to like comics as like this very important medium in my life. Like, I've been reading comics for forever, but like I didn't for a while, and then I took this class in college, and it got me back into the kick of like going back to comics. And it's because they are capable of like really important discussions in a way that makes it almost more personal than just like prose or whatever, or something like that. You can like see what's happening. It's just a fascinating medium to me. And the fact that this book, that Persepolis, does such an amazing job of showing the child's view of something, of going through something like this, without necessarily casting aspersions on any one group. It's like oh, my family is affected, I love my family, so therefore I kind of look at it through this lens, and like I believe. But you also see the things where like she believes basically anything that she's told in school or whatever, and then her parents have to sit her down and say like, well, here's why maybe that's not correct. And you see everybody's biases coming through the eyes of a child, and it casts in a really fascinating light of like, it's important to believe in things, but also it's important to not believe everything you hear at the same time. This whole story is great, and she goes through her whole like younger childhood while all these events are happening as this observer or like witness to things that she can't possibly control or have any control over, and it just makes it feel more kind of alive and like dangerous because she doesn't really know what the next thing that's going to happen. She doesn't know if her father's going to come back. There's one scene where her father goes out to take picture. He takes picture. Her parents. It's really interesting. So, like, to get into the plot a little bit, because I haven't really talked about the plot at all, but like her parents are protesters against the regime before the revolution and after the revolution. But they, as it turns out, are also their lineage goes back to royalty a couple generations previous. So like they have a vested interest, you find out, but also they become almost like Marxists as the rise of Marxism comes about and things like that. Like there's just this really, really, really fascinating overlap that is kind of, for the most part, just beyond her reach, Marjane's reach, as like to really fully comprehend what's going on. But she is like, what I really love about this book is you kind of see her as she gets it. Like it's like watching a child like first understand something. You see her as she like starts to comprehend the things that are going on in her world, which is very, very powerful in terms of storytelling. And I think that's why a big part of the reason why this book is so loved and became so huge, but also it's just great storytelling on top of that. So yeah, I completely agree. I'm going to give it a full marks and a 3.
One thing I just, one thing I forgot to mention before is, Marjane, Satrapi
yeah.
is a year older than me. So basically, part of me is flashing back to when I was 8 years old, seeing it from what I was absorbing, my non-understanding of it, and then being able to relate to her non-understanding of it as somebody who is in the front line, so to speak. So it really was, for me, it was very fascinating.
Yeah.
You brought up the hostage situation, which is interesting because to America that was humongous, and to the author it is a footnote, basically.
Yeah. Right.
It was
one
there.
panel discussion of that happening, and so it's interesting. How,
interesting change of view.
Yeah, well,
perspective.
What's fascinating about this is she wrote this, I don't know, 20 years after this all happened, or maybe not even that long. I think she wrote it in her 20s, but it's like you get the things that she thought was important, not what news was talking about necessarily, but like the things that related to her family, the things that related to like her school life. You know, like what she remembers very specifically and points out very specifically when they had to start wearing the veils in school, or you know, when the veil became like obligatory for everyone. You know, like a few years later, things like that. And I think that's fascinating, right?
One point of, because you said, you know, we were talking about the hostage situation, how it was important here. The funny thing was, once the hostage situation was over, Saturday Night Live did this thing where like Paul McCartney was arrested in Japan for marijuana possession. He spent 10 days there, and all the news prior to that was doing like day by day, month by month what the hostages went over. And then Saturday Night Live parodied the 10 days of Paul McCartney, which I all of a sudden I remembered reading this, which kind of shows you how important something is, and then all of a sudden how trivial it becomes.
Hey, Paul, remember when I arrested for weed in China?
Yeah, Japan.
Yeah,
I remember.
That was awesome. Yeah. Scott, you want to continue with themes?
Yes, so I think Ian mentioned it. So I think it's a lot of, not a lot, but maybe a layer of 2 or 3, possibly 4 things that all combine, that given the events of the plot and where it's set. So yeah, the classism thing, it's basically at the core of it, I would say it's a coming of age tale, right? It's her in her adolescence, but she just happens to be living in this part of the world at the time when these political and upheaval events were occurring, which, as you mentioned, were affecting her and her family. And she's trying to be a teenager, like, you know, a preteen / teenager, while all this shit is occurring around her, and like how that's informing her sensibilities, right? So there's a whole section of part where she's sort of rebelling, like as teenagers do, and she's getting all the Western stuff, like she's like the Western music, right? She's one of you kids in America, like she has a tape of that. Yeah. She's wearing like the punk clothes, like the Chuck Taylors, and like the jean jacket and stuff, like a Michael Jackson button and all this stuff. But while the greater social and or political upheaval is happening around her, Right, so I think it's all very fascinating. It's very personal of you, as you mentioned, like very personal touch because of the way of the format and the way it's like framed. It's like you feel like you're almost there with her as one of her friends or something, like, you know, following her hopes and dreams and how those change. And she starts like reading books and becoming more educated and just more worldly about what's happening in the history of her region of everything. So hold on, I know you want to say something in a sec, but that's basically, to me though, that's those 2 or 3 things all sort of coincide to become like a greater conglomerate of a theme, and I think it's handled and portrayed and depicted excellently. So I'm looking at a very strong one, and now I'll toss it to you guys.
Actually, I should have just run over your conversation there, because the history of what you used to do. But nonetheless, going back to what you were just saying, though, there's the one with Michael Jackson button, and they're like, "Is that Michael Jackson button?" Nah, it's Malcolm X.
I was just about that was
an excellent moment. Yeah, it was a great joke.
Yeah.
So I don't want to frame it like this, but I think it's kind of an interesting discussion to bring up. Is the concept of martyrdom and how it kind of applies to one of the intents of this work is that she's trying to immortalize her heroes, the people who gave their lives to fight against both the Shah and the Islamic Republic and Saddam Hussein in the war. And she's telling these vignettes of people who died fighting the systems and trying to say, these are their names, remember them. And in a sense, making them
like
martyrs in a
memorial.
certain sense.
Oh.
But I think martyrdom has
It has its own connotations
yeah,
too, I'm
that
sure.
are negative. So, but I still think that that's a brilliant thing to do. It's a noble effort to, it's about her, but also about the people, the forgotten heroes of the war.
That's a fair point. Yeah,
I think that that's, again, really important.
Yeah.
I thought it was funny but halfway through when she started getting idolizing martyrs, when they had the mural about the martyrs, the veins of the revolution, and at the end when the martyr hits her personally, she's like, "Well, there was no vein to the." It's
it was somewhat of an illusion or propaganda.
It was interesting, like how martyrdom really is in a non-hitting you over the head way is like. That it's in the eye of the beholder, so to speak. And it's just like, how much do you cling to an ideal? How much is a human life versus your ideal?
Absolutely. I think that those are all very good points. And I wanted to also touch on the religious aspect of this as well. She talks about very early on having a like really personal relationship with God in this, which becomes very strained after she sees some horrible shit, like understandably, right? And
yeah, you're right. Good point.
You know, as she goes throughout, she talks about her religious experience, her experience with religion, I guess, and like how her mind changes. How initially she wanted to be like almost sacrilegiously wanted to be a prophet, right? Like, and she got made fun of for it and everything. I don't know if it's
sacrilegious. I think she generally was sort of like, again, I hate to say it in a connotation, like sold on it. Like she wanted to be right because of genuine reasons.
Of course.
But it wasn't really to the Islamic God. It was the Ahura Mazda of Zoroastrianism.
Right.
Yeah, which he definitely mentions that right. Yeah.
And considering the pride that the Persian culture has, I have no doubt that she would be reading the works of Zoroaster.
Right, of course, and like but that brings another like little wrinkle into the whole thing, which is really fascinating. Exactly. And like her insistence that she will be a prophet is like laughed at by everybody except for her grandmother, who she holds in like very high regard. Like another thing, like she almost makes her grandmother like this giant like pillar of like love in her life and everything. And there's this really fascinating thing, like, you know, at the end of this book she gets sent away and you don't know what happens until you read the next book, but she spends a lot of time in Europe and like just her Marjane Satrapi as a person, but you can read about it in the next book, but like she spends a lot of time in Europe and like and she comes back and don't hold me to anything specifically that I say because I haven't read the second book in a very long time. But when she talks about her experiences, like this this book, the first book about her childhood, is all obviously written through the lens of her older self, right? Who has gone through experiences that we don't know about yet by the end of this. But it is through the lens of like somebody who's really gone and like analyzed herself and come to understand like what her initial, like her younger selves, like religiosity or like very placing this really important godliness thing that she was going through early on in life, and then that changing throughout, her becoming like more westernized. I think she's kind of like looking back and saying like, oh, was where that began, like here's where I read a bunch of books, and here's where I met with my uncle who was a prisoner for a long time. And here's the experience that I had with my parents as protesters and just things like that. Like I think that the themes in this run pretty deep, and it's a book, so it's like bigger than your average, or it can possibly contain more than your average like movie that we usually do, but like there's a lot going on in this book, especially in terms of themes.
A lot of layers you can unpeel there.
Yeah, she really wants to talk about a lot of things and does so quite well without like them clipping each other or like really
or being overbearing. Yeah, agreed.
I think that themes is a very strong one for me.
Yep.
There was I always like pointing at hypocrisy in general, and I think that specifically to the Islamic regime, like she makes some really good hypocritical points about their hypocrisy, where the uneducated window washer is all of a sudden a judge for whether someone gets a passport or not because he was willing to grow a beard and say the right things versus having
a qualified,
done the
skilled
work
person
to attain that position. And in general, just like when they're showing up the martyrs and they just some guy died of cancer and they're like, oh, we're gonna raise him up as martyr too.
And then his widow joins in to
So I thought it was very well done, and especially because it's a child looking at these things, like truth through the mouth of babes type situation.
True.
It allows a child to point out the hypocrisy.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I think it's ones all around for themes, and that's going to move on to me with antagonists. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of like power structures in general, I think, are the antagonists in this
societal pressures,
situation,
internal and external.
Whether it's a religious power structure, whether it's a governmental power structure, whatever it is, it's the idea that you can't. It's and it feeds right into the hypocrisy thing, right? It's like, oh, now very 1984-esque, right? Like it's like, all right, so last week this guy was in charge and now he's left, so we're gonna rip him out of the textbooks. We're gonna completely change what we're teaching in school, and she got to see this in action. And like
as it unfolds.
The thing that like I really am fascinated by is like, this is a comic book, which is like 2 layers removed from real life. But as I'm reading this, I'm trying to imagine what it would be like to be living through it and like having like her looking back on these moments and then trying to convey the most important parts of them. And like the things that antagonized her are clearly what she put into this book. And I really loved the way that she was able to make them seem real and like actualize the hardship of it without making it seem like she had, like as you mentioned earlier, Ian, she has a pretty bougie life in terms of like people in, so like she has a pretty easy life, but like she's just watching people go through shit and it's internalized, right? Like she remembers this. It's things that she's going to remember forever. And that is almost the definition of like antagonism to me, is like something that's traumatic, even if it's not like directly
affecting
traumatic to you. Like it changes you to see these things, and that's what she wrote about in this book. So
Yeah, I mean, she's discovering the concept, as you said, of hypocrisy itself, like encountering it in real life, again, as she grows up and as all these social upheaval things, social and or governmental and or both, depending on whatever timeline a given year may be. And I was going to throw in, like, it's almost like not quite as farcical or as satirical, but like Death of Stalinish, where like, like shit like that is thrown in. And yeah, she's reflecting back upon her memories and how it affected her and how she struggled with trying to come to terms with what was happening and talking to her parents about it, and them having to explain to her, like, well, as you said, you can't always believe everything that you see and or that you're told. And again, like growing up in that atmosphere, I think it wasn't oppressive, but you certainly felt it via her character, via her XP in the story. So yeah, I think it was super effective and very well conveyed, and I'm going to give it a very strong 1 on the antagonistic front, even if there's like, it's just a general force. There's no one character or one actual thing.
I don't know. I think that the Islamic Republic is an entity which is very much
a lot of tendrils, though.
Yeah, but it's a, like, for at least a good half of this work, they are the embodiment of her trials and tribulations.
That's fair.
But I like the fact that the torturer is the same guy under the Shah as it is under the Islamic Republic. Because something's changed. Somebody never did.
Yeah,
he's good at this job. Someone needs to be the torturer.
Meet the new boss, same as he'll.
Someone needs to pull the fingernails out of people's hands.
Yeah.
Can I keep my job if I grow a beard?
Oh yeah.
Sure.
Here?
You'll get promoted if you grow a beard.
That's why I was gonna. No, but that's the whole thing. Was to your points. It's like the same torture. It's like probably all he had to do is, convey some physical change. And I have nothing else to add. I'm giving antagonist 1.
Also, the level of detail they go into the torturers, but almost offhand pieces. People who were in prison for. Like what?
They were just joking about it. Basically, like, I thought you were dead. Oh no, they couldn't kill me. Instead, I had 7 lives.
That's when you think of that stuff. I'm like, oh, you're back after 10 years as a political prisoner. Yeah, they beat me with whips and stuff on my feet, and they pulled out my fingernails. Yeah, I'm here now, though.
Yeah,
but sure.
I mean, if you don't laugh, you'll cry.
But 1 for me.
All right, so that's 1's all around for antagonist. Chris, protagonist.
The protagonist. I have to say we keep. Yeah,
the titular
Marjane.
Our girl Margie.
But the funny thing is, I kept thinking about a movie we keep referencing, A Separation, where you had a girl basically was between like a bougie lifestyle. You've got 3 class levels in that, and this one, where the book ends, is basically the same age as the woman, the girl in the Separation. But I'm glad I saw that, because on top of the visuals that you get from the illustrations, I had a really great sense of the different class levels, because class does play a part in this.
Very much.
There is one thing they talk about, which is something that's true in America.
It's constantly a force there.
Yeah, but the thing that she brings up that's something true in the United States is poor or more working class places are where they have the military recruitments. They come first. And, it's one of these things where she is really great at her character, and as a character in the book and as an author is really fantastic at showing the similarities. Like, we always think about their culture versus our culture, but the constructs of it are so similar. And being told this by somebody who doesn't quite comprehend, because, 8 through 15.
Well, she's beginning to be able to as it unfolds.
But the thing is, it's like you're putting this stuff together as you get older, and then once you are removed from it, seeing things as an adult, on many levels, as somebody who is her age from an American perspective, sitting here at that time, versus, over the last year, I can say that we've gotten a little more in having a less vague idea of what the culture is like there. And it's kind of like the whole Twilight Zone thing, where it's like people are like all over. And the thing is, she does such an incredibly effective job in doing this. And I know I keep referencing a bunch of other stuff, but she really does, her character does bring into focus so many things that I see in our culture now for the first time, that I never knew, that I never really saw about living in an East Coast elite perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to be woken up to, like,
Get woke, sucker.
well, I'm not going to say woke politics because that's a whole other issue.
Mm-hmm.
But
Oh my God.
yeah. Let's not go there because that's another extreme. But what I'm saying is, I appreciate this book so much now, and I appreciate her character so much now in various ways that I could not have before now. And, so I identify with her character looking back on it, around the same time, and everything that I've learned since. I thought she was an incredible protagonist, and amazing props to the author herself. This is an autobiography, and, it's probably one of the strongest protagonists I've encountered. So, very strong one.
I mean, I'm giving her one. She's related. Like, if I can relate to a 14-year-old Iranian girl, then she's done a good job. Like, I know it seems jokingly, but, like, yeah, it was. She just encapsulated, like, her mindset and the spirit of what it was like, and being able to convey that through the medium of a comic is not an easy thing to accomplish, I would say. And yeah, I followed along with her character, and I'm giving her probably maybe the strongest one of all the questions, or one of the like the way she portrayed herself and her mindset again in her adolescent years. So
Yeah, I completely agree. I love her as a character. There is no point in this book where I feel lost.
Yeah.
And like I feel lost following the story of like a 14-year-old Iranian girl, like you said. And I think that she does an incredible job of just laying out there whatever,
yes,
like the point of the specific chapter that she's talking about, like just laying it bare. It doesn't have, like, I think she does a really good job of like not really having,
she reserves judgment
an
on a lot of
agenda,
stuff.
right?
Yes, exactly.
It's more of like, this is what I experienced, here's how it went, see for yourself what it was like.
Exactly.
Now, she does, of course, have a bias because that's what she was going through, and that's fine because it was her. She's talking about her experience, but she is really trying to talk to her experience as close to the metal as she could possibly get. I think, and like laying it as bare as she possibly can. While still like allowing you to know her thoughts, like what she was thinking about it, and like how she felt about things, and I really love that about this book. I gotta give her a very strong one as well.
I thought you were going to say some more, but yeah.
But I think it is effective.
She's quite good.
I think it is effective that she's telling the story through the lens of a child as an adult, but maintaining that child trying to interpret the world around him. And again, I just want to say the only reason I was referencing these other things is because she pulls. You don't have
to explain to me, man.
No, but she pulls. I mean, it's just incredible. Like, listen, you guys, how much she pulls into focus.
Absolutely.
It's just,
we can agree upon that.
Yeah.
Completely agree. All right, so that's ones all around.
Yep.
Supporting, Ian.
This has a very robust cast.
Mm-hmm. True.
With their own personalities. Now, granted, yes, you're seeing them through the eyes of a child, and I think she captures both the self-reflection of looking back in a memoir style, but also capturing how a child would look at these characters. So the idea of the people who went off to prison, now released after the Shah, these are the heroes. Why wasn't my father one of these types? But then she kind of realizes that he was a hero in his own way, and both her parents fairly progressive in a sense for an Iranian family. You have all of their circle of friends and family that goes into it. You have the teachers and how it's a very fleshed out world, and it feels very populated with people with their own passions, with their own ideas of how the world. Now, granted, because it's the same circle, they all kind of agree upon what's wrong with society, but you do get to see you do get to hear arguments
even between
that. from both supporters of the Shah and supporters of the Islamic Republic, and propaganda, and you get to see news outlets from both the BBC, which is one of the prominent news markets there, but also from the propaganda from within the society, and it works. I think that it's a very, very fleshed out world.
It's really fascinating how you even it gets so granular with its own supporting characters, where you see the arguments between characters who agree with each other. You see
exactly.
between her uncle, who's spent time in jail and spent time being tortured, and her father, who hasn't, and has a more not upper class, but kind of upper class, a better life than her uncle has had, and they kind of disagree on the way that the society should progress, or they disagree on
how they should
whether
even
something is a bad news or not, things like that.
Yeah.
And it's really fast, her parents being kind of blind to how bad things were going to get with the religious, with the Islamic regime taking over, and they were it'll be fine, they can't do it was a people's movement, but it gets turned off of that so quickly, and they don't even have time to kind of react to that. Other families were getting out, the boy that she liked flees to America, things like that. I really love all these little stories, and all these characters really, really, really make it a great world. There's the two friends of the family that get out of prison after such a long time, and eventually they end up getting killed by the Islamic regime, or one of them does, and the other one flees, but his sister gets killed. And it's just this really...
I just want to jump in for 1 second.
Yeah.
Because I think it's, even very minor characters. I'm going to give you an example of this. They go to get a fake passport from, and he has hiding in his house, a woman who's a communist, or accused of it by the Islamic Republic. And you see her in and then briefly 3 panels. They found her.
Oh, they saw
her
her
on her street and shot her.
Executed her.
Done. And it's such an affecting scene for a character who I don't even know how to line.
It is, and it's so fascinating because that's a direct, for us Americans, that's a direct comparison to Nazis, right? That's what we think of when we see that. I'm not sure that. I'm sure that was on her mind after she had been
more exposed,
European educated after when she left, right? I'm sure that was kind of a parallel or comparison that she could draw, right? But probably not to her
10-year-old
maybe
self,
not to her younger self. I'm not sure, but maybe not to her younger self when she actually found out about this, or when she's 13 or 14 years old or whatever. But it is so obvious that that's a direct line of comparison there to something that I guess is more taught to us, more personally understood to us, because we get taught that when we're kids and stuff like that. But it does definitely draw that exact line between those things and make it, but the thing that teaches me when I read this book when I was in college was oh, this isn't the Nazis weren't a one-off humanity thing. They were a thing that happens fucking everywhere. Yeah. And they were just the best at the PR, I guess, or whatever, or the worst at the PR, or whatever it is.
But it wasn't that Nazis were the last time the U.S. were the good guy in a war,
right?
So,
we could talk about this forever, but
the funny thing, right about that. But the funny thing was, it wasn't. You find out later, it wasn't just that they got her and executed her. They got her, basically got the dowry, married her, raped her, killed her, and then gave for $5. It wasn't.
Oh yeah, that was horrific.
It's worse than you think it is.
And all in 4 panels or something like that. It was very quick. Maybe it was here's what happened. It's very matter of fact, because that's the shit that you saw at the time, and that's the way that you explain it. Here's what happened. It fucked me up. That's it. It's just matter of fact.
It fucked me up a little bit.
The matter of fact thing is I think the more haunting part of it. But so. To bring, I was going to say bring some levity, but just as a broader point, this is a very, basically more than not semi-autobiographical. So that means the side characters almost like wrote themselves. Like she doesn't have to write them. These are people she knew in her life who were like and part of the circle that she lived in. The sort of, like you said, the bougie thing. But like even those, so like they had a maid who was like of the lower class, and like she has like a little side story as well. So yeah, of course her life is populated by all these characters, like not even characters, people, sure, as portrayed in her recollection of it, but people who actually existed and who had various and wide-ranging, like experiences, and that came into intersection with her life. So yeah, of course, like I'm going to give it a 1 because of that very nature. It exposed her to all these different perspectives, or at least a number of them, and then later on she can reflect back upon them and sort of like boomerang her mindset off of it.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and to your point,
I'll have to say 1 for me. Good, Chris.
about her nanny came into her employ when she was 8, like the boy across the street when she got older, but she couldn't read or write. So Marjane wrote all the love letters, and then was caught by Marjane's parents, and then brought over to the boy and shamed in front of him.
Yeah. Well, that's the other
And,
thing.
and
Like,
you've got this
she
bougie, progressive family, and they did something horrific.
yeah, they are not perfect, and she makes sure to tell you that
Yeah.
that her parents are not perfect, and she definitely looks up to them, but
She starts to see the cracks,
she
and like when
definitely
she gets
shows their flaws in this.
For sure.
Well, she shows them fighting, but she
Yeah.
also shows them deeply
older. I
in
mean,
love.
she shows
It's-
the real, like 3D dimensional, like how a married couple and their child would interact with
It's
everything.
almost if this was strongly based off a true story.
Yeah, like I said. But yeah, but that sort of lends itself to giving.
But even in that, like so many times you see stuff like that, and they cover up all the faults.
Sure,
This is
true.
not that story.
Warts and all.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
So I'm giving it a 1.
All right, I think that's 1s all around for that. Scott, you want to talk about dialogue?
Sure. So like not somewhat similar, but of course I imagine some of the conversations were, if not word for word, like paraphrased very accurately enough.
Actually, literally, there's, I think twice, she says, he actually said this.
Yeah.
So like so she points that out. But yeah, I mean like it's sustainable because they're based again on real life things that happened to her, and being a Western outsider in quotes, if you will, then like it allows you a lot of insight into her personal mindset, again, many levels, then her relationship with her mother and father, her like close, and her grandmother, uncle, her close-knit family, and then expanding the circle, her neighbors, her friends, their friends, like the fellow progressives that they are running the circle with. So yeah, like while not like I don't have anything specifically picked out, I don't even have a copy in front of me, I will say while reading it got me along, it gauged me very, very to a high degree throughout, and it allows an insight to everything I just said, and going back to themes that we covered already. All to say, I'm definitely giving it a 1. There was nothing I noticed I was like, oh, that was weird, or like written oddly, or phrased oddly, or too much exposition, or too much this and that, right? It's all perfectly inserted throughout, and like not drags you along, keeps you again engaged and invested in the story. And as she grows up, the conversations in fact get more like elaborate, or like have another layer to them that you can get something more out of. So I'm giving it a pretty damn solid 1 on all that. Now you can pick up some lines and quotes. Go.
I have 2 lines, if that's okay?
Please.
Before you start. It wasn't only the government that changed. Ordinary people changed too. Look at her. Last year she was wearing a miniskirt, showing off her beefy thighs to the whole neighborhood. Now Madame is wearing a chador. It suits her better, I guess. As for her fundamentalist husband, who drank himself into a stupor every night, now uses mouthwash every time he utters the word alcohol. Again, showing off the
Hypocrisy and all that.
hypocrisy
Yeah.
there.
Sure.
But I want to read off one of my favorite quotes because it's very personal to me. My favorite character in this work is the Marxist uncle who spent
Anusha, I believe.
time
Anusha, I
in,
think, yeah.
the man is a saint. So he goes off to Moscow and has a picture of his wife and kids, but the wife's face is crossed out. And so Marjane asks, why doesn't the lady have a head? She was my wife. We are divorced. But, okay, but why is her head scratched out? Russians aren't like us. What? Don't they have heads? It's hearts they don't have. They don't know how to love. And that is absolutely
number one.
By the way,
100% demonstrably true.
Jesus.
So says you. But at least it resonated with you, is what you're saying.
The illustration in that part is him just like crying. Like he's very, very emotionally upset about that as well.
I probably should have put more emotion into my recitation of that. They don't have any hearts.
But it resonated.
It's hearts they don't have.
What the thing that I found there was something that when the things they tell children, like, you know, if somebody dies, oh, he went on a trip or he escaped to another country, and somebody told that to her, and she goes to her friend, he's like, your dad's dead. And everybody pissed her off. Everybody was pissed off at her,
It's like the
especially
Santa
when her
Claus thing,
did
but
like
worse.
yeah, and then, like a day or so later.
Turns out her dad is alive. No,
Yeah.
it was a while later.
Yeah,
I
it
think.
was her friend's dad that was alive, and then later on, her mom's talking. I don't know if it was about her uncle or somebody else, or it was another one of her friend's dads, and her mother basically doesn't say went on a trip, but she's kind of diverting her, and like she's just like,
I think it's about
That's when they hit the
Anoush
bomb.
later.
it was no, because she actually said goodbye to Anoush.
No, she didn't. She was like, "Oh, this is." Well, she did
yeah.
in jail. Like
But-
she's the one that visits him.
Yeah, but her mom's like taking her out, and then she's like, I think so and so went on a trip. Like, in other words, I thought it was really interesting.
He went back to Russia.
He went back to Russia. That was it.
No,
But
no.
she, but
She says he went back to Russia,
yeah,
but
she
he got
saw
arrested.
she saw through it through her couple years' eyes and got more attuned to. Well, when is
Going on a trip means dead. Yeah.
Yeah, when does it mean? Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I love the dialogue in this. There's so many great scenes between characters that are so full of meaning and like just humanity in general. Just every conversation is her like learning. I think that's a lot of what this book is about. Is like every
Yeah, for
conversation is about her like becoming more of her own person and like learning what the world is, and a lot of it's like really shitty, but she also learns like really nice things too, and that's always great. Like there is that sense of hope and clinging to the happiness that she has, even when things get kind of grim. But yeah, I'm gonna give it a strong one. I don't have too much more to say about it than that. So it's ones all around. And I am going to talk about style. I love the style of this book. I always have. And again, it's a somewhat nostalgic thing for me. The illustration style is fairly simple, but it tells everything that you need to know about this story in illustration. And the dialogue is so well married to what's going on in the pictures. Like, this does such a good job of there's a thing about comics, and like you could read whole books, amazing great books about how comics work and things like that. They're not exactly like movies, they're not exactly like books, but this one does such a good job of having the dialogue and the illustrations perform two separate functions while still being perfectly in tune with each other the entire time. And I absolutely love the way that it works in terms of that. Like we just said that the dialogue is great. The style wouldn't be great without great dialogue. Just these are almost married, two married things because of the way that comics are, or graphic novels, whatever you want to call them. But I can't say enough how much this drew me in the first time I read it. If you look at like one page of this, you'll be like, oh, what's so great about it? But really, if you go through this book, it's such an integral part of what makes it good is the illustration style and how it works with the story overall.
It's got a great fluidity to it. It's a quick read. It's got an incredible fluidity to it, and the illustrations really help that along. I'm giving it a 1.
Now, I'm not giving it a 1. I obviously am, but to me, like, it's good. It's a simple style, like it's black and white, and sort of like it's not elaborate. It's not your fucking Alex, God, whatever. One of the Alex Ross or whatever his name is. I can't remember.
Alex
like,
Ross.
the Marvel guy. So sure, but because of that though, it's not distracting. It works for what, as you said, like to carry the story along. So it may not be the most like visually impressive thing you've ever seen, but it's as you said, married so well. Just back up, married so well to the rest of it that it becomes like sort of more effective than it would be otherwise. I guess I want to say. So, Getty.
Well, even though it is simple, the expressions in this are captured amazingly. So even if you don't read the dialogue, you can see what
you can see the emotions on characters' faces. Yeah,
are dealing with,
True.
And specifically when there's that kind of double speak when they're trying to, you can tell that their emotions don't match necessarily the words they're saying.
Yeah.
But I have another piece of dialogue that I forgot about that I just randomly flipped open to. And for our New Jersey fans out there, I think this is like what would happen if we went to war with Pennsylvania. How can you say that? The Iraqis have always been our enemies. They want to invade us. And worse, they drive like maniacs.
Yes.
It's such
I forgot about that one.
an amazing line
Little moment.
to show because everyone has a neighbor they think are the worst drivers in the world.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
So anyway, yeah, very strong.
All right.
Stronger one
One's all around for that?
Yeah.
for me. Yeah.
All right. And that's going to go to recommend. Chris, talk to us.
I don't think I can recommend this book enough. It's just
Really took me on a roller coaster there.
Yeah.
because I mean even your parody about living in New Jersey, I'm like, well, Pennsylvania wouldn't be my enemy. New York would be my enemy because they take everything away from New Jersey into their own. I mean, the thing is, this book, and I think pulls so much into focus historically, personally, socially. I mean, there is just so much happening in this book with in most times very limited amount of words, and I think we've discussed the simplicity of the artistic style pulls in. So I mean, it's like almost redundant when she puts she compares God to Karl Marx, and it's just like that they both have these beards, and you look at the illustration, and she's between basically
It's a nice little
the same, I mean, it's so many wonderful things to say about this thing, but I think the thing that it does most is it pulls in the most trivial driving experiences, is like dealing with out-of-state drivers to what was happening at the time, it's such a nexus of so many things. I mean, and not least of all, puts in a perspective, an Iranian perspective of what was happening, of how they view the Americans and the British and the Russians and the Europeans. And it's just such an incredible Iraqis. Palestine and
themselves.
And it's just such an incredible thing. This book is so great. I highly recommend this book.
Yeah, do yourself a favor, check it out. Try not to remain an ignorant Western American asshole and expand your horizons. But like in all seriousness, I think we're all about to give it a 10 if I've been doing it correctly in my head. So yes, it is totally worth reading. It will open you up to a new experience, and it is so well executed that it's just something that it should be more in the cultural climate, I guess I want to say, the conversation. So
I'm going to go off a little bit. I apologize ahead of time, but a long time ago I watched. Well, I don't have too many heroes. A long time ago I watched an Anthony Bourdain special on Iran. Parts Unknown, I believe the show was called, where we see different cultures. I was fascinated by Iran then, and I have seen film from Iran. I studied the history of it. I think it's a amazing culture, and as you pointed out, I think that there is whether you want to talk about economics or culturally or whatever, there seems to be a hostility between America and Iran, which there shouldn't be. And if anything, Iran should be one of our major allies in the Middle East because they have an awful lot in common with America. Culturally in a lot of ways, and I think that it's important for people to understand who we're told our enemies are, and this is a great place to start to give you a look that people aren't monoliths. There's complications everywhere, and slippery slope to theocracies, and all of these important aspects that go into what's an important part of our modern day history. And I hope that nothing untoward happens, but that's not the history of the world.
No.
It's really interesting building on what you said. I went to one of Henry Rollins' spoken shows, 2008. So it's the end of the Bush administration. And he went to, Pakistan. He went to Iran, and a lot of people are like, there's all sorts of shit coming out. Why are you here? And he's like, I'm here to meet you. And they're like, me? How'd you hear about me? He goes, no, I'm here to meet you. I'm like, I'm here to meet the person on the street, the people we don't hear about. And I think to your point that if you are not Henry Rollins or anybody else who can afford to somehow go to Iran and risk basically not being able to come back, because of the political situation, having something like this is a great way to hear about the stories from people who did go there or who lived there.
Yeah. Yeah, I really think this is a fascinating story. Like I said, I read this long ago, and I was glad for an opportunity to read it again. I posted something on Facebook recently that was a quote from Marjane Satrapi where she said, I'm going to paraphrase here, but it was basically like, I don't know you, speaking to like Americans. She was like, I don't know you, and you don't know me, but I have a lot more in common with you than you have in common with your government. And our governments are the same. And like, I think that you catch the early glimpses of her coming to that idea of understanding of people in this book. And as Chris said, I can't recommend this highly enough. I just had to leave the little dot, the ellipsis there. But yeah, 100% I'm going to give this a recommend. And that is going to give us all 10s. The question, I think it deserves a 10.
I would concur.
Do you guys agree?
Yeah.
Excellent. So
I think it's 10. A must read, like I said.
Aggregate. I think that everybody should read this book, whether you're into comics or not, whether you're into, politics or not, whether you're into history or not. I think this is a great read for anybody. So I'm going to leave it at that. I've been your host, Steve Ramosi, joined today by Chris Morgan,
New Jersey rules,
Ian Manzer,
breaking down barriers by compartmentalizing everything into animated cells,
and Scott Thurler.
Rock the Casbar. See you next time. Good night.
Editing and engineering by Stephen Ramosi. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.